This is episode 88, The Plastic Trail of Your Online Order and the Seaweed Alternative. Definers, welcome to another episode of Sustainability Defined, where we define sustainability, one topic and one bad joke at a time. My name is Cecilia.
And I'm Nethra. And before we jump in, I just want to put some congratulations out. Cecilia, you just graduated from Georgetown with your master's in environmental and sustainability management. Way to go.
Thanks, Nethra. Very excited to have graduated. And shout out to Georgetown. Shout out to the MSESM cohort. Couldn't have done it without the squad. And if any of you definers know of any career opportunities in the sustainability landscape or have any advice, please reach out. I would be so happy to hear it.
Yeah, and we're both on the job market right now. Any hiring managers who are listening to this, Cecilia and I both need a job.
Please.
But we're excited to see where this new chapter takes you, Cecilia. And before we get into the episode, I just want to preface that this episode is not sponsored, but we are talking to a very cool organization whose story and mission really highlights a highly innovative solution to the issue that we're going to be talking about today, which is the plastic waste of online orders. This org is called Sway, and you're going to hear from their communications lead. We had such a fun conversation with her, so let's just get into the episode.
So to lay out the episode outline so you all can follow along as you listen, first we're going to talk about the rise in online shopping and what this means for sustainability. Then we're going to get into the footprint of plastic materials associated with online shopping. And finally, we will conclude on a positive note, as always, with options for alternatives and what we can do as consumers to incentivize change. Stay tuned to hear from Sway's communication lead, Alyssa Pace, and learn more about how alternatives like seaweed are replacing these plastic products associated with shipping and packaging. Let's get into it.
Now, we all know online shopping. Its convenience, its adaptability, its seemingly never-ending options. Online shopping has truly revolutionized the way consumers look for goods, from the infamous Amazon and Shein to resale shops like Depop and Poshmark. The sectors of the space, they're really limitless, and it honestly kind of stresses me out to have this many options. I also have a few mega cheap retailers that are also on my hit list, aka Temu and Wish.
Stop it.
I know. I like TikTok Shop, Temu, Wish. Whenever I see that, it just it stresses me out. I mean, you can pretty much find anything online, like truly anything.
You can literally get anything. I mean, quick story. I was a big One Direction fan when I was younger, still am. And I remember scrolling through eBay once because I was going to a concert and I was looking for some merch. And I found someone selling an actual bag of air, like literally in a Ziploc bag from the concert they went to. And it was advertised something like, Harry Styles breathed this air. I mean, the amount of stuff you can buy online is astounding and a little bit scary. And the key takeaway here is fandoms are nothing to be messed with.
That's crazy. Honestly, it doesn't surprise me. 2012 in the Tumblr era was a wild time to be alive.
So true, Nethra. The mustache, the galaxy pant era.
Oh my god, the galaxy pants.
Incredible. Can't beat it.
The peplum tops, statement necklaces.
It'll come back at some point, though. They will. Statement necklaces.
I really hope it never does. But anyways, there is a dark side to online shopping, definers. As you probably know, this is no secret in the sustainability world, but in a single minute, and I found this stat very interesting to paint this picture, global Amazon buyers make approximately 8,937 online orders per minute. And US users specifically place about 6,136 orders a minute. So we're making up about 75% of the global orders, right? It's crazy.
Please.
It is the dark side. Earlier, we mentioned that online shopping has revolutionized the way consumers can buy goods. And what we mean by this is, shoppers can browse and buy 24/7 from their computers, smartphones, removing the need to travel to a store or adhere to store hours. So increasing that convenience factor. There is an immense global reach allowing retailers to meet untapped global markets. Like, for example, someone in Montana can purchase products from Japan or Italy just as easily as from a local retailer. I do this with my matcha.
I'm a victim of the matcha trend.
And it's so good, though. These are the perks. And then, this is so obvious, but there's just like a huge unrealistic product selection. Like we don't need this many options.
And it doesn't just end at convenience or reach. There are many other aspects of online shopping that have further enhanced the customer experience to push people to keep purchasing and, expand their awareness of just such a wide variety of products that they didn't even know they needed and probably don't need. I see this the most, for example, with the Target shopping experience where you go into Target, you have a list of like maybe 3 items you need to get, and you walk into the store with 20 items and a very steep priced receipt. And you can't help yourself sometimes, but there are certain things we can do to stop this overconsumption crisis. But back to the aspects of online shopping, more things in online shopping include competitive pricing, where online sellers compete fiercely on price and shipping and often pass a lot of savings to consumers. There's also algorithmic recommendations,
Ah, the algorithm.
which is where machine learning engines analyze past behavior and preferences to surface products that you're most likely to want. There's also user reviews and ratings where thousands of customers can give their opinion, which provide a more balanced picture of quality and performance of that product than a single salesperson's pitch would have. And there's flexible return policies and so much more. But what does this convenience of online shopping mean for sustainability? What are the major environmental trade-offs that we're facing?
That's a great question, Cecilia. And I'm just going to say the algorithm is criminal. Like, I will literally be talking about something, and then in the next second it pops up, and it influences you to buy it because it not only like shows up visually on your screen, but it keeps showing up. And it's the psychology of it all. And I'd like to just say we recognize that there are a lot more trade-offs than just the environmental trade-offs here. I mean, there's huge social trade-offs. We've seen this on the news. Unfair pay, labor, social overconsumption challenges in regard to like high production demands, supply chain logistics, and just challenges in regards to procurement. Like there's just such a scope here that could probably take another 7 episodes just to fill the amount of things that we could say. But I mean, like I mentioned in our chocolate episode, when you are paying such low prices for something that requires resources being extracted, shipped, manufactured, crafted, and then sold on shelves, someone at some point pays the price. Whether it's to their family, to their mental health, to their physical being, to their pockets, there's a hidden cost somewhere down the line, and it's often not ethical. So we just say all of that to say that we recognize that there are many other challenges, but this episode is specifically covering the environmental impacts and more specifically the plastic and packaging footprint of these orders, because obviously air pollution, water pollution, all of that, again, 7 more episodes. We could talk about all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. In high school, I did order a Shein top, and it
Same.
really smelled like gasoline. It was very scary. But thanks for that clarification, Nathan. It's important to recognize that global challenges are not obsolete in the sector that they affect. That's why so many companies are increasingly reporting on that triple bottom line, being people, planet, and profit, or otherwise can be known as ESG metrics, which is environmental, social, governance metrics. So this whole scope of online shopping and all the issues and waste associated with it is part of a wicked problem. It's an incredibly complex challenge that is interconnected in its nature with a multitude of factors, as we just mentioned before. So back to the original question, what does this mean for sustainability? Well, to put it short, there's a lot of waste associated with online shopping, the distribution footprint, the actual products footprint, and then more specifically, packaging waste that we will specifically focus on this episode.
Right. And poly mailers are those typical mail bags that you get whenever you order a package online. You know, they're thicker than a plastic grocery bag. They're pretty sturdy. We probably all have seen them and interacted with them multiple times, have multiple in our house, in our trash cans, whatever. Most people don't know what to do with them afterwards, so they just end up tossing them right in the trash, unlike grocery bags, which at least my Indian mom used as garbage bags around the house or like pseudo shower caps when we did like Ayurvedic hair masks.
Your mom sounds so smart, Nethra. She is a financial and environmental queen for recycling and reusing like that. I love it.
Right. Like I always use my old Kroger bags for my trash cans. And of course, now I always bring my reusable bags to the store, so I don't collect as many anymore. But I do try to save my poly mailers after my orders and use them to pack my shoes when I travel
Hmm.
and at least find something, right? Like when I moved back to New York, I like put stuff in them. I use them as like pseudo bubble wrap. So
So smart.
I recommend it. Anyways, these poly mailers are made from non recycled materials and are usually virgin plastic. Poly is short for polyethylene, which can be made from synthetic materials. They can also be made from post consumer recycled materials or even PLA, which is a corn based bioplastic. But again, usually the cheapest route is to be made from virgin plastic. Polyethylene is actually the most commonly produced plastic. This is a polymer and it's primarily used for packaging, the bags, the films, the food containers, etc. I also just want to take a second to zoom out. All traditional plastics are made from fossil fuels like crude oil, natural gas, and coal. So the fossil fuel industry is the plastic industry, and the plastic industry is the fossil fuel industry. They're like hand in hand. They're one and the same. In fact, Shell has a whole business sector called Shell Polymers, which produces various plastics, and they have a polyethylene producing section. So, like, this is the same industry here. And to better understand the impacts of these synthetic materials and fossil fuel based plastics, we're going to look at the life cycle of a mailer bag, our standard mailer bag that we all have from cradle to grave. And let me tell you, it's a long life cycle. These mailer bags take upwards of 1,000 years to break down. So every poly mailer, mailing envelope, mailing bag that you ever have had still exists and will long outlive us.
And it's so creepy to think that, they're still on this earth with us today and they will outlive us. I mean, that's a crazy statistic. We're all just vibing on this earth together. But let's start with the raw materials that you mentioned earlier, the synthetics. At the cradle stage, which is the beginning part of the life cycle of this product, this is where mainly raw material extraction and processing is taking place. Fossil fuels like oils are refined into raw materials like that polyethylene that you just mentioned. The next step in this life cycle is manufacturing plastic pellets into bags using different techniques like molding. And our communications lead, Alyssa Pace, will get more into this later in the episode. But then they're transported and distributed for product use, which is shipping in this case.
Right. And the next step in this life cycle is manufacturing those plastic pellets into bags using different techniques like melting them, molding them, stretching them into bags, whatever shape you want to make them, right? And then they are transported and distributed for product use, which is usually shipping in this case, since we're talking about polymailers. Their end life, or the grave stage in the life cycle, is what has the most visible environmental effects that we are familiar with. Cue those images of the massive landfills and the plastics floating in our waterways.
Hmm.
Literally keeps me up at night. But this is not to discount the effects of manufacturing and the impact that these plants and these manufacturing facilities have on surrounding and frontline communities, waterways, biodiversity, air pollution. Like, those might arguably be worse. But these standard polymailers are not biodegradable, and over time they leach chemicals into our aquifers, and eventually that makes their way into our food, soils, and bloodstreams. I mean, we've seen the studies that, microplastics are being found in the umbilical cord and basically in 99% of all human beings. Like, we breathe it in. I think we ingest like a credit card's worth of microplastics a week.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to something that you said earlier. The images of massive landfills and plastics floating in our waterways, definers. If you are brave enough and you want to explore more images related to this, I highly recommend checking out a documentary on Netflix called Buy Now, The Shopping Conspiracy. And you have to brace yourself for this, but it will truly open your eyes to all the ways associated with online shopping and the psychology behind it. It's an insane film. I recommend it. But back to it. Unfortunately, this industry isn't going anywhere. Sure, convenience is amazing, but I often say it can be a supervillain of sustainability. The poly mailer, aka the shipping envelope, its market is experiencing significant growth, with projections estimating to reach about 1.7 billion US dollars by 2028. This market is a key part of the larger mailer packaging market, which includes cardboard boxes, packaging peanuts, large film, bubble wraps, styrofoam, etc., all projected to reach almost 107 billion US dollars by 2033. So this market isn't going anywhere. A lot of people are benefiting from this, and there's a lot of profits associated. Although a lot of these materials, like the polymailer bags, have the potential to be recycled and avoid the grave stage, making the life cycle cradle to cradle, there is a large lack in consumer awareness in terms of recycling, and there's a lot of inconsistent and inaccessible recycling infrastructure, which makes this, more challenging issue.
Ah, yes, my favorite topic. Most people don't know that you can't recycle a grocery bag in a household recycling bin, also known as a single stream recycling service. They actually get stuck in the machinery and can clog and ruin the machine itself. They have a separate collection sites for plastic bags and films, usually at your local grocery store, but you should actually check your local recycling ordinances as they vary county to county to see if you can actually put them in your regular bin. And when I say single stream, I mean the typical recycling bins that you see that accept like paper, plastic, aluminum all in one bin, hence single stream, whereas like a multi-stream recycling would be like one for paper, one for metal, whatever. But there are so many things the average person does not understand about recycling, which is fair because I did not either until I was an intern at the Office of Sustainability at UGA. Go Dogs. But I don't know. I feel like this tangent is necessary because I used to think that a napkin, because it was paper, was therefore recyclable without even considering that it was covered in my pizza grease and I was actually contaminating the recycling bin by placing it in. So I remember hearing this, like some girl was like, yeah, like I think it was a diaper in a recycling bin. They were like, well, it's paper. And I'm like, no, girl. Everything that you put in a recycling bin is actually usually typically hand sorted at some point in the game. So, definers, here is a helpful hint. Say no to the 3 F's when it comes to recycling, and when in doubt, throw it out. The 3 F's are food, foam, and film. Polymailers would fall under that film category. So obviously if anything has food on it, you don't want to put in the recycling bin. It's going to contaminate things. Unless you can wash it off. Like if I have a cream cheese bin or whatever, I'm going to rinse it out before I put it in the bin. Foam, no styrofoam in your traditional recycling bin. You can probably find other places to recycle that comfortably. There are tons of companies that do that, but not in your traditional bin. And then film. So the chip bags, the granola bar wrappers, the cling wrap, the poly mailers, the grocery bags, that does not go in the recycling bin. And there can be mislabeling on some of these packages, and you might even see a recycling sign on them. But again, check your county ordinances to see if they accept these films in bags. Many counties are now accommodating them with the rise of online shopping, so that is great. But, be a diligent recycler, definers.
It's amazing to hear that more and more counties are accommodating these type of recyclable materials that are not traditionally able to be recycled. That's exciting. And this non-degradable aspect of the polymailer bag and their lasting impacts on our health, wellness, and right to clean air and water can really inflict upon a company's reputation and sustainability commitments and goals. They have a responsibility to do better as a company, which is why a lot of companies like Coca-Cola, for example, are working to be more transparent and help educate a lot of their consumers on plastic consumption and recycling.
And let's zoom out a bit and talk about why companies are using these in the first place. They have many benefits in terms of shipping. They're cheap, they're waterproof, they're dustproof to protect the contents. They're usually tear resistant and can also withstand transportation. So their convenience, price tag, overall efficiency in terms of shipping makes them easy and reliable. And they have become the norm across these e-commerce platforms.
One of the alternatives I have seen in recent years actually is from Amazon. I've received a lot of packages that are supposed to be, in the polymailer bag, but they're sort of in a cardboard-esque mailer. And although they have an inner plastic lining, they are subject to weather conditions. I mean, who wants to receive their online purchase in a wet bag? It's not a good look.
Right. And while it does help reduce the plastic composition of the product, these mixed materials are not recyclable. The more I learn about recycling, the more intuitive and simultaneously confusing I realize it is. Like people, coffee cups are not recyclable. They are paper coated in wax. The wax prevents it from being recyclable. Like that feels intuitive, but then again, it's like paper, so people think you can recycle it. And it's similar with the cardboard and paper mailers. Like they have a plastic lining on the inside. They're not recyclable even though they appear to be paper. I mean, they're, I guess, less plastic use, which is nice, but Man, I'm sweating just talking about this. Like my blood pressure is like pressuring.
Right. And clearly, the business case for alternatives exists. And a lot of companies and corporations are being pushed to be more transparent and aware of these problems by customers and shareholders in terms of the company's impact. And they're putting more money into research and development to explore ways for these businesses to adopt alternatives like seaweed. So these alternatives can boost a company's appeal and increase customer loyalty for their commitment to lower footprint and adhering to sustainability goals within that company. And something I've learned from my master's program, shout out Georgetown MSCSM, is that the business case for sustainability is an adaptive strategy that optimizes cost savings from things like energy efficiency or supply chain optimization. The business case of sustainability also challenges today's complex problems by offering innovative solutions that are also cost effective. And cost effective is key right here because no business wants to lose profits. A quote that resonated with me from an article I read recently called Searching for Sustainability: Nine Heretical Questions Entrepreneurs Should Start Asking Now. Definers, I encourage everyone to look this article up. It's a really good read and it's inspiring. Andrew Winston in the article, he's an acclaimed speaker and author, says that these massive complex challenges call for, quote, a deeper level of innovation that challenges our long held beliefs about how things work. So what he means by this is that we have to start asking these crazy, heretical, out of the box questions to push innovation forward and incentivize these corporations to do better, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, if the polluting industries can completely reimagine and rethink the way we shop, then why can't sustainability industries challenge that right back? That is what our guest for today's episode will be talking about, asking these out of box questions. Sway is a clean tech startup scaling seaweed based, rapidly compostable replacements for plastic, beginning with flexible packaging. These are poly mailers. Their flagship Sway poly bags, they're strong, they're protective, they're lightweight bags that are almost fully compostable after use, were designed for integration into existing supply chains. So they're really just meant to come in there and replace that bag that I've been hating on this entire episode without sacrificing performance.
What a disruption to the industry. I love it. They're featured in Vogue, Forbes, Business Insider, and more, and they've gotten some incredible recognition as a company and are part of the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, the Sustainable Ocean Alliance, and 1% for the Planet. They're also a member of the Eco Ally community, a group of organizations working to achieve sustainability goals, and they've been able to achieve milestone collaborations through their production partner, Eco Enclose, a company on the front lines of sustainable packaging.
Let's go ahead and hear from Alyssa. She's going to be talking all about solutions here, which is a light of hope after talking about the impacts of all of this. Okay, me and Cecilia promised we would keep it low with the ASMR, but that was a poly mailer that you just heard. I went up and found one in between interviews because, of course, we all have plenty in our house. But before we get into our lovely interview, we just want to thank Alyssa from Sway for being here with us today. Alyssa, welcome to Sustainability Defined.
Hi, y'all. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. So, Definers, Alyssa is the communications lead at Sway, and she really works on helping people understand Sway's mission, value, and story of the organization. So, Alyssa, could you tell us about Sway's origin story and how you got to be involved with this organization?
Sure thing. It's one of my favorite stories. So, Sway was founded by Julia Marsh and Matt Mays, partners in business and in life. And it was really the hypothesis of Julia's design MFA. She was trying to understand if materials could replenish the planet rather than degenerating. And amongst her search for better materials and better raw material inputs, she discovered seaweed. Fast forward a year or two of some really deep diving into seaweed growing systems, international travels, and she and Matt decided to get Sway off of the ground. And this was happening in early 2020. right around the time that the pandemic hit. And if you remember that time,
Perfect timing.
it was full of single-use plastic.
Right.
It was the perfect time for Sway to be emerging into the world. And at that time, it was really just a prototype. And I discovered Sway, as many people do, through Instagram. I think Julia had put like $5 behind an ad and it landed on my feed because I'm kind of the target consumer for Sway packaging. I'm an environmentalist. I studied environmental science. A lot of my background is in marine health and regenerative agriculture. And so when
Wow.
I saw this material made with regeneratively farmed seaweed that could decompose in your backyard compost after use, I was like, hang on,
Love
I
that.
need to get involved in this. And I had no background in material science, but every single day since then has been a learning journey for me.
Hmm.
So I came on board with Sway kind of part time as a consultant back in 2020 in the very beginning. And now 5 years later, it's a whole nother business.
That's amazing. I actually met Julia at Circularity 24, I believe, because she was one of the keynote speakers there. And this is when I worked at GreenBiz as their corporate sustainability manager. So kind of a small world. Her speech really was a hit and it really stuck with me. Sway's mission particularly is very fascinating. We love hearing about innovations like Sway, and we always want to know these innovations are out there, but how are they actually being adopted? Can you tell us a little bit about what brands use Sway packaging currently? And maybe actually, before we get into that, what are some of the offerings that Sway has that are common and typical?
Sway's core technology is a pellet, which doesn't sound very exciting, but it's actually super exciting because the plastics that we know today are oftentimes typically made with a pellet. And these pellets can melt and flow into kind of whatever shape you want them to be as the output plastic. So, really, our core technology is a 100% bio based pellet that's made primarily of seaweed, plus some plants in there as well. And this can be extruded on its own or combined with other compostable polymers to create all kinds of different formats. And what we're really focused on to start is flexible films.
Hmm.
So if you're thinking back to that single-use kind of plastic that we were getting all the time in the beginning of COVID, I'm sure you're thinking of plastic bags, little pouches that were protecting everything that we saw. And that's exactly what Sway can create with our materials. So we're using our flexible film, which we call TPC Flex, as the material of poly bags, which are those shipping kind of garment bags that you might receive if you order, let's say, a t-shirt online. And as of this week, we actually are also offering handled retail bags.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, and there's much more in the pipeline from flexible films into other opportunities with rigids or even more.
Sounds exciting. Yes.
Back to that original question, what brands can we see using Sway packaging today?
So we've just started producing much higher volumes of Sway materials, which is going to allow many more brands to start using Sway. But we launched this material, this polybag format, with a group of brands that we call the Sway Innovation Coalition. And that group of brands includes Prana, Faraday, Florence, which is John Florence's brand. He's like one of the top surfers in the world. So really cool to see someone who's so passionate about the oceans using our packaging.
Full circle.
Very full circle.
Amazing.
Alex Crane and more coming on board as we speak.
That's awesome to hear that so many brands have been adopting Sway's products in just 5 years since the company started. It's incredible that they have gained, enough space in the market to do so. Could you tell us more about the sustainability aspects of the seaweed alternative in its displacement of plastic?
We get this question a lot, and I would love to be able to show all of the listeners here an LCA that directly compares a Sway bag to a traditional plastic bag. And for transparency, we are still undergoing an LCA. So hopefully we'll have metrics to share soon. But also just a kind of a more broad comment on LCAs as a whole is that typically they're accounting for the negative impact of a product. How resource intensive is it? And they're not necessarily capturing the whole picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So For example, LCAs wouldn't account for how much microplastics are accumulating in the human body as an effect, a huge impact of that plastic bag.
Right.
But for Sway, we want to be accounting for the positive impact, the regenerative impact. And that's where seaweed comes in really strong. For those who might be a little bit newer to seaweed, I'm so happy to talk about all of its benefits, but I'll try to keep it a little short and snappy for this. Seaweed can absorb excess nutrients in the water. We've kind of crammed the numbers here or crunched the numbers here. And we figured out that every Sway poly bag has, on average, depending on size and a variety of factors, approximately 20 grams of carbon absorbed into it, which is amazing. Seaweed can boost biodiversity. It can deacidify our oceans, which you usually think about coral reefs being acidified, but that's also affecting shellfish. We've got partners who are in Maine who are reporting that the shellfish in their areas have stronger shells, which are also calcium carbonate, just like coral reefs. And it also creates a new economic pathway for coastal communities who rely on fishing, who are seeking climate resilient employment moving into the future. So there's so much good happening just as seaweed is growing, both on the social and ecological side. And then at the end of a Sway package's life, it's compostable, both in home and industrial systems. So that bag, whether you have access to municipal composting services or not, can go into a compost that you've got at home, and it's going to break down into carbon, sugars, water, and even small amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, which is all part of seaweed. And those are actually the three main nutrients that plants need to grow. Mm-hmm. So it creates this really beautiful biological loop that can give back to the earth as it disappears, quote unquote.
That's so cool. I think something that I struggle with too when it comes to compostables or bioplastics is that idea of it not being backyard compostable. So just to be clear, you said you could toss in a home compost.
Yes. Sway is specifically designing our materials to be compatible with home composting. And
wow,
we understand that there generally seems to be some distrust in the compostable materials landscape these days. And that's because people are tossing those compostable, again, for the listeners out there, quote unquote, compostable forks or cups into their backyard composts. Mm-hmm. But those materials are made for industrial composting systems where the conditions are much more extreme. You've got way more heat and energy that's breaking down these materials. But Sway materials are going to be gentler in the whole process. They take gentler conditions to break down. And therefore, if you're throwing them in your worm bin, those worms can break them down.
So good to know. And a very important distinction for our listeners, that distinction between industrial composting and backyard composting. So thank you for that. And I know we're trying to move into, like, in some regards, a more plant-based world, a more ethical world. So this is a cool format of being able to achieve that. And I'm just always a skeptical consumer. So I always tell my friends and even the definers, not everything that is sustainable is ethical and vice versa. And we've talked a lot about trade-offs on the show before and what it means to be a smart consumer and look into the supply chain of products. So cultivating seaweed can still be extractive, as is any production. So to ask you directly, where is your seaweed grown or harvested, and how is it farmed sustainably? Are there any impacts to local communities or marine ecosystems that you have observed? I mean, negative or positive, you mentioned a few, but I'm just curious about that process.
Yeah, it's such an important question to be asking because just like we've seen with terrestrial agriculture, systems of monoculture can create horrible impacts. And now that we're looking at seaweed as this regenerative marine crop, we've got to make sure that we're managing it in a way that can be sustainable moving forward and continue to be a benefit to these ecosystems. And with Sway specifically, we work with seaweed grown all around the world. We've got partners who are in Indonesia, Chile, Madagascar, Puerto Rico, and even here in the States. We've got folks who are in Maine, in Alaska, and the cultivation looks different everywhere. It's very much dependent on the regional context, which for anyone who's listening and knows a bit about regenerative agriculture, you probably appreciate that. It's always going to be specific to the environment that it's in. And Sway has taken a lot of care while developing our seaweed sourcing strategy. We have a framework that we like to call SURF, which stands for Sourcing, Understanding, and Rating Framework. And this helps us create specific criteria that can be universal to all of the farms that we source from. It has our definition of regenerative in it. And that means that the seaweed that Sway is sourcing is providing ecosystem services, which again can look very different in different contexts.
Right.
It's not extractive of native ecosystems. It's grown in open ecosystems, so not in tanks or on shore. There's no plastic that's entering the seaweed farm, and farmer welfare is always prioritized and centralized. Just to give a few examples of what that could look like in different places of the world and with different suppliers, we have a sourcing partner that's in Java who practices multi-trophic aquaculture. If you're trying to visualize how seaweed is growing, it grows vertically, right? So it goes from the top of the ocean down to the seafloor. And if you're looking along that, there's different trophic levels. You've got your fish, your shellfish, your seaweed, and it's ensuring that this cycle is a closed loop where all of these byproducts and waste from one species are acting as resources for another. So it's improving efficiency as it grows. In Puerto Rico, we're sourcing sargassum, which is actually an invasive species. And this is pretty much the one case where we are using wild harvested seaweed rather than farmed seaweed. And that's because the sargassum is piling up in excess on shore in Puerto Rico. And it's wreaking havoc on these beaches. If anyone's been down to these equatorial regions, you've probably seen sargassum piling up. It smells bad. It's harming tourism rates. But Sway, through the Puerto Rico Studio project led by New Lab and Invest Puerto Rico, very specific project focused on how to upcycle that sargassum into new value-added projects. We figured out how to load that into our pellet, which then acts as the foundation for our packaging.
What?
Incredible.
That is like such a great example of feeding two birds with one hand. It's like, okay, we have one problem and we need product. Like what a symbiosis.
Totally. I love how circular this whole business model really is. It seems that Sway has really thoroughly thought about every aspect of sustainability that they can touch on in terms of social aspects and environmental aspects. And it's motivating to hear that such a young company can do so much impact. So now on to the business side of things. I'm curious to know how this compares to plastic. What's the current price per unit for the plastic versus the seaweed alternative? And how do you expect to bridge that gap as you scale production?
Sway packaging generally falls in the same realm as plastic alternatives you'd find on the market, like paper or other compostable products, recycled plastics. But we understand that driving price down is always going to be a huge motivator for brands to switch. And plastic, which is dirt cheap because it's been around for a long time, over 100 years.
Unfortunately.
It's tough to compete with, right?
Right.
It's become heavily subsidized and perfectly optimized, and we're playing catch up. But over time, as materials can scale, they can go down in price. It's all about economies of scale. When you're increasing the production, you have bigger and fewer production trials, and you can also bulk purchase ingredients for lower rates, right? So as a brand new company, we aren't at that economies of scale level yet, but it's definitely the vision, and we're achieving it over time.
Amazing. I imagine that for a company to invest in this type of product, that would not only enhance their transparency and ESG reporting, but it would also improve customer loyalty if they're interested in sustainability.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. A line was told to me the other day. I forget who said it, but it made me laugh. It was, this is funny for all the comms and marketing folks out there. The only marketing tactic that has a 100% open rate is your packaging. So you better invest in it.
That is facts.
I love that.
But it's true. I mean, like as consumers are receiving products or handling products, they're often going to be interacting with the packaging. And I think especially when you're buying a product that is more sustainable, has natural fibers in it, the list goes on of like how a product can be sustainable. You don't want that paired with plastic. That feels icky it's counterintuitive, right?
It's contradictory at best. It's like, why did I go through the struggle and financial commitment to buy such a sustainable product if it's just going to come wrapped in plastic, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like when there's
yeah.
water bottles at COP. I'm like, what are we doing here? Why? Why? And I feel like scaling is just, it goes really hand in hand with collaboration and breaking into like conglomerates or umbrella organizations that can really support you disrupting this industry. And you guys are a part of Eco Enclose, from what I understand. I see that you're on their website, front and center, as a seaweed option. Could you tell the definers a little bit about what Eco Enclose is and how it's facilitated your involvement in changing the industry?
Absolutely. I would love to talk about Eco and Close. They are incredible. Eco and Close is a leading sustainable packaging distributor, meaning that they offer packaging to brands. When Sway was first getting started with our packaging, we were working in these one-on-one relationships with brands, which was an amazing experience because we got to work so closely with them. But as time went on, it was just much harder to handle logistics on a very small team. We were probably 6 or 7 people when we first started having packaging available for brands. Now we're only 10, so we're still very small. And so our business model started to shift. Instead of Sway being the ones who are doing the direct logistics, coordination, supply chain, manufacturing, sales with brands, Eco and Close, a distribution partner, can act as that for Sway. So bringing in their expertise when it comes to all of these different factors allows Sway to remain super nimble and then focus on our real value as a company, which is innovating material science.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like having that middleman come out and sort of take on some of that logistics can really give you time to focus more on things like the innovation that you mentioned and then continuing to disrupt the market. What have been some of your biggest hurdles or even surprising wins as you scale in this industry?
New materials are super challenging. There is going to be a constant feedback loop of refinement based on the manufacturing feedback or brand feedback. And every production run looks a little different as we're making these small tweaks here and there. And that's led to our progress not necessarily being linear. You know, you say you want better seam strength, and then all of a sudden you realize that, like, oh, the film's a little more golden than we thought it was going to be, which sets a different expectation for brands. So there's just all these like specific little things that you might not even think of, and then it ends up being an outcome of a production trial. But working with partners like Eco and Close has helped us really rapidly improve our material. And we can also find tailored use cases for those unexpected material outcomes. Like, for example, we ended up with 4 mil film, which is like a little thicker than the 3 mil film that we wanted.
Yeah.
Again, such a tiny difference, but it does make a difference to brands who want this super thin material.
Right.
And Eco and Close helped us find the use case for that, which is actually those handled bags that I mentioned earlier. Kind of just a serendipitous, happy surprise.
Yeah, very practical, very trial and error. So we've heard a lot about brands and how big corporations and organizations have played into this. I'm sure the definers are more consumer than anything. So what can consumers do to further incentivize the transition from plastics to alternatives?
There is so much that we can be doing as consumers, but I think most of it circles around just talking about solutions every chance you get. Talk to your loved ones about reducing plastic in their daily lives. Start composting yourself in your own backyard. That's a journey. I could talk about that all
I
day.
love backyard composting.
And yeah, and talk about how seaweed and other kinds of renewable raw ingredients are being used in materials. I think it's something that not too many people are aware of. And I think when they start to learn about it, makes them excited and hopeful for the future. And then also, anyone can point their favorite brands to Sway now that we have packaging available. We're just getting started and we're really excited to work with more brands.
Okay, love it.
And for anyone who's based in the US, I would definitely recommend just reaching out to your local businesses and your local representatives to support compost and compostable packaging because demand really matters when it comes to expanding access to composting facilities.
Very true. Okay, definers, you heard it here. Start talking about plastic and how to reduce it in your everyday lives. Start your journey in backyard composting. And if you work for a company that utilizes plastic packaging, start advertising for those alternatives such as Sway and start emailing or reaching out to businesses that operate with compostable packaging.
Yeah. And something I always like to do is like if I ever get like feedback forms or surveys from companies, I try to actually fill them out and write about how I think it would be nice to have sustainable packaging or something like that, because there's very few people that actually put comments in. So when I feel like, and Alyssa, maybe you can speak to this, but like as a marketer or someone who's receiving that feedback, like that written feedback of, hey, I would really like to see you reduce your plastic, etc., really stands out. I think it's so important to speak out and communicate with brands that you're purchasing from. Also, something I say almost every episode to the definers is vote with your dollar.
Oh, I'm ready.
Vote with your dollar. Like, this is how every dollar counts. And if you put it towards brands or packaging or anything that's supporting a better environment, then I think that's important.
So true.
Yeah, I mean, it's so cool to see what Sway's doing. We're so happy to have you guys on the podcast, and I'm a big believer in manifestation, and a big part of manifestation is visualizing the future. So I'm visualizing when I'm at my Amazon checkout cart and I get to click the seaweed option on the bag.
I can't wait.
I'm manifesting that for Sway.
Sway the future.
Yes, I loved when I saw that on your website. Just
Love it.
it's very catching.
Yeah, let's just make it as easy as possible for everyone to play a role in this seaweed-based material future. That's all you can ask for.
Exactly.
Amazing.
I like that. And how we usually wrap up our episodes is by asking our guests a party fact question. So this is a question that if you said this at a party, people would be like, whoa, I never knew that.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
Because you're talking about plastics at a party.
Of course, when you're holding that red Solo cup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to be like, this could actually be replaced with seaweed. And the reason why people should be excited about that, here's a great seaweed fun fact.
Ooh.
If seaweed forests and farms covered just 9% of the ocean, they would sequester the entire planet's annual carbon emissions.
What? Oh my
Wow.
God. That is crazy.
The carbon emissions to date?
Annual carbon emissions.
That's still amazing. Okay, so we need to get on this ASAP.
Yes.
Take my money, Alyssa. How do we invest?
That can be attributed to ocean foresters. I did not do that study myself. They did, so go check that out.
Okay, cool. I'm wondering what 9% of the ocean coverage looks like, though. That's got to be significant.
It's got to be massive.
Yeah.
The ocean is huge. More ocean than land on our Earth. However, seems small in the grand scheme of things.
It does. It does.
I was like, listen, if we can have the Great Pacific Garbage Patch and find out a way to remove that and replace it with seaweed, then I say that if we can literally create a garbage patch, that's probably at least 1% of the ocean, then we can do it with seaweed. We can switch our
Oh my
habits.
gosh.
Yeah.
That sounds like Sway's next project. Easy.
Inspiring.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on to our podcast and talking about the seaweed alternative. We had a great time just learning more about the company, its mission, values, and how it's acting in this space of transforming the plastic industry. So thank you for the great information. And definers, I hope you're asking questions. I hope you're talking about plastic alternatives. So, definers, to recap what we talked about earlier, when it comes to plastics, the most important factor is source reduction. Instead of ordering items individually, try to place all your needed items in one order at a time to reduce the number of deliveries and the associated packaging. Consider opting for slower group delivery options like Amazon Day to consolidate multiple orders into one delivery. And these are just examples. You can do this source reduction in a multitude of ways.
Right. These are specific to being an online shopper, because I know a lot of us unfortunately use Amazon quite frequently. I mean, it is a useful tool in the day-to-day, but it's really important to be a mindful consumer. And I know that this has kind of been under attack for some reason recently, where people want to put all of the responsibility on corporations, and I think that's important. But at the end of the day, individual action does influence a greater movement. So being a mindful consumer is still just as important as holding corporations accountable. So when I think about being mindful, I think, do I need this? Do I have something similar at home? Can I borrow this from someone? Can I get this secondhand? So these are all things that intrinsically can actually reduce your waste, because you're consuming less, you're purchasing less. And it's a good business case for yourself to save money. So there's that. And we also heard from Sway, a great company doing seaweed alternatives to your typical poly mailer and trying to reduce this plastic consumption that we've been touching on so much in this episode. So seaweed is a great material for carbon sequestration and water filtration, and Sway is actually creating plastic alternative pellets and seaweed polymers. So look out for brands that are using Sway and other sustainable options, and advocate for those brands that don't already to check them out. So yeah, definers, as I always say, vote with your dollar and hold companies accountable, but also hold yourself accountable in your day-to-day actions. This was Sustainability Defined. I'm Nethra. Thanks for tuning into this episode.
And I'm Cecilia. We'll see you next time.